What would you do if the world judged you by your appearance rather than your worth? Ethan Gray, a humble yet determined grandfather, walks into an upscale jewelry store, searching for the perfect gift to honor his granddaughter's achievements. But instead of being greeted with respect, he faces subtle dismissals, quiet whispers, and outright assumptions about who he is and what he can afford. What the staff doesn't know is that Ethan carries a quiet strength and a secret that will turn their world upside down. As tensions rise and lessons unfold, this story will take you on a journey of resilience, dignity, and transformation that touches not only Ethan, but an entire community. Have you ever been underestimated or judged unfairly? How did you respond? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's dive into Ethan's unforgettable journey and grace in the details. Ethan Gray rose with the sun, the soft light of dawn spilling through the lace curtains of his modest home. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, letting his feet rest on the cool wooden floor. At 73, his joints creaked with protest, but the discomfort was familiar, a quiet reminder of a life well lived. The small house was quiet, save for the occasional chirp of birds outside his window. Ethan cherished these moments. The world seemed simpler in the early hours, unhurried and patient. He shuffled to the kitchen, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee greeted him like an old friend. On the counter, a photograph sat in a simple wooden frame. His granddaughter, Lila, grinned brightly in her high school graduation gown, her arms slung around his shoulders. Her boundless energy had always been a source of joy for him. College graduation next, Ethan murmured to himself, lifting the mug of coffee to his lips. That thought lingered as he settled into his favorite armchair, the morning light streaming over the newspaper on his lap. Lila had worked hard to earn her degree, and Ethan wanted to mark the occasion with something meaningful. Not just a gift, but a keepsake, something she could carry with her as a reminder of how far she'd come. A watch, he decided aloud, the word rolling off his tongue with quiet satisfaction. Ethan had spent a lifetime weathering challenges with quiet resolve. The youngest of 4 siblings, he had grown up in a small southern town during a time when opportunities for people who looked like him were scarce. His father had worked long hours at the local mill, while his mother juggled multiple jobs to keep food on the table. Ethan's early years were marked by struggle, but also by a fierce determination to rise above it. He had been the first in his family to attend college, scraping together scholarships and working odd jobs to make ends meet. Those years were grueling, but they taught him the value of resilience. Eventually, Ethan built a career in business, starting as a clerk and slowly climbing the ranks. By his 40s, he had launched his own company, creating a legacy that provided for his family and inspired his community. But despite his success, Ethan never let go of the humility that had carried him through the hardest times. As he sipped his coffee that morning, his mind wandered to the past, to the lessons he hoped Lila would carry with her into the future. The city bus rumbled as it made its way downtown, the familiar sound of the engine punctuated by the occasional hiss of air brakes. Ethan sat by the window, his hands resting on his lap as he watched the streets blur past. He preferred the bus to driving. It gave him time to think and offered glimpses into the lives of the people around him. A young couple sat across the aisle, their whispered conversation punctuated by laughter. An older woman near the front adjusted the wide brim of her hat, her shopping bags neatly arranged at her feet. The city had changed over the years. The old brick buildings of Ethan's youth had been replaced by sleek glass towers, their reflective surfaces catching the midday sun. When the bus pulled to a stop near the bustling downtown district, Ethan stepped off and took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee and the distant tang of car exhaust. Ahead of him stood Whitman's Jewelers, its elegant facade gleaming under the sun. The store had a reputation for sophistication and exclusivity, but Ethan had never been one to shy away from spaces that weren't immediately welcoming. The moment Ethan stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped slightly, the cool air from the store's vents washing over him. Soft music played in the background, a classical piece he couldn't quite name. The interior was immaculate polished marble floors, glass display cases that sparkled under recessed lighting, and shelves lined with luxury handbags and jewelry. Ethan adjusted his hat and walked toward the watch section. A young woman in a tailored blazer glanced his way. Her smile was polite but perfunctory, her gaze lingering briefly on his coat and worn shoes. She didn't approach, instead turning back to her coworker, who whispered something that made her smirk. Ethan ignored the exchange, focusing on the display in front of him. His eyes scanned the collection until they landed on a silver watch with a sleek leather strap. It was simple yet elegant, exactly the kind of understated beauty he knew Lila would appreciate. He waited for a moment, hoping one of the associates would help. When no one approached, he decided to take the initiative. "Excuse me," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm as he approached the counter. The young woman turned toward him, her smile thin. "Hernan Tegrid Ibgil." "Yes," she asked, her tone clipped. "I'd like to see the silver watch with a leather band," Ethan replied, nodding toward the display case. Abigail hesitated for a moment, her gaze flicking over him again. "That one's from our designer collection," she said. "It starts at $1,200. Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I'd still like to see it." With a slight shrug, Abigail retrieved the watch from the case and placed it on the counter. Her movements were brisk, almost dismissive. Ethan picked up the watch carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hands. It was perfect. He could already imagine Lila's smile when she saw it. "I'll take it," he said simply. Abigail blinked, clearly surprised. "You want to buy it?" "Yes," Ethan said. "Please wrap it nicely. It's a gift." As Abigail turned to wrap the watch, Ethan caught the faint murmur of voices behind him. A couple near the handbag section exchanged amused glances, their words just loud enough to reach him. "Must have wandered into the wrong place," one of them said with a chuckle. Ethan's grip on his cane tightened slightly, but he kept his expression neutral. He had faced judgments like this before, and though they still stung, he refused to let them define him. The bus ride home felt longer than usual. Ethan sat near the back, the neatly wrapped box resting on his lap. The comments he had overheard replayed in his mind. Each word like a small stone dropped into a pond, sending ripples of frustration outward. He had always known that the world could be harsh, but moments like these reminded him of how much work remained to be done. When the bus pulled into his stop, Ethan stepped off and began the short walk to his home. The evening air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. As he approached his house, he glanced down at the box in his hands and felt a renewed sense of purpose. This gift wasn't just for Lila. It was a symbol of everything he wanted her to carry with her. Strength, resilience, and the understanding that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else's assumptions. Ethan sat in his kitchen that evening, sipping tea as the hum of distant crickets filled the air. The wrapped box sat on the table before him, and his thoughts wandered to Lila, wondering how she was preparing for her big day. He decided to call her, flipping through his phone until her name lit up the screen. After a few rings, her cheerful voice answered. "Hi, Grandpa." Ethan smiled at the sound of her voice. "Hello, sweetheart. How's my favorite graduate doing?" Lila laughed. "Busy. I've got final projects, internship applications, and my friends keep dragging me to every senior event on campus. I don't think I've slept in 3 days." Ethan chuckled. "Don't run yourself into the ground. You've worked hard enough already." "I know," she said, her tone softening. "But I want everything to be perfect. This is my chance to show what I can do." Ethan's smile grew wistful. "You've already shown it, Lila. You've made me proud every step of the way." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when Lila spoke again, her voice was tinged with emotion. "That means everything, Grandpa." "Really?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, the warmth of her words spreading through him. "Just promise me one thing," he said. "Anything. Don't let anyone make you think you're less than what you are," Ethan said. "You belong in every room you step into. Don't ever forget that." "I promise," Lila said, her voice firm. As they ended the call, Ethan looked at the wrapped watch again. He knew it wasn't just a gift, it was a message. A reminder of everything he wanted Lila to carry with her into the next chapter of her life. The conversation with Lila brought Ethan back to his own youth. He remembered the countless times he had felt out of place, unsure whether he belonged in the spaces he found himself in. His mind drifted to a specific memory, his first major business meeting as a young entrepreneur. He had arrived early, dressed in his best suit, only to find himself ignored by the room's other attendees. They had exchanged handshakes and pleasantries among themselves, glancing past him as if he were invisible. But when the meeting began, Ethan had spoken with quiet authority, presenting a plan so thorough and innovative that even the most skeptical attendees were forced to listen. By the end of the meeting, their dismissive glances had been replaced by respect. That day had been a turning point for Ethan, teaching him that dignity wasn't something others could give or take, it was something he carried within himself. Now, as he sat in the present, he hoped that Lila would learn the same lesson, though he wished the world wouldn't force her to. Back at Whitman's Jewelers, Abigail Ross leaned against the counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The store was quiet, with only a handful of customers browsing. She glanced at the watch display, where the silver timepiece Ethan had purchased had once sat. She hadn't thought much of him at the time, a quiet man with a worn coat and an old-fashioned hat. But something about the encounter had stayed with her, gnawing at the edges of her thoughts. "I don't get why you're so hung up on it," one of her co-workers said, noticing her distracted expression. "I'm not hung up," Abigail replied defensively. "It's just, why would someone like him come here to buy a watch like that? It doesn't make sense." Her co-worker shrugged. Maybe he saved up for it. Maybe it was important to him. Abigail frowned. She didn't like feeling uncertain, especially not about a customer. It made her uncomfortable, as if she'd missed something important. Sophia Clark watched the exchange between Abigail and her co-worker from a distance, her brow furrowing. She had been working at Whitman's for several months, and while she enjoyed the job, there were moments like these that left her unsettled. Sophia had seen how Abigail interacted with customers, how her tone shifted depending on their appearance or demeanor. She remembered Ethan Gray's quiet presence, the way he had carried himself with dignity despite Abigail's dismissive attitude. That moment had stuck with Sophia, a silent challenge to the way things were done at the store. She had wanted to say something then, to step in and help, but fear of upsetting the status quo had kept her silent. Now, as she polished the glass counter, Sophia resolved to do better. The following day, Ethan woke early, the morning light casting long shadows across his bedroom. He dressed slowly, taking care to adjust his hat and tie before heading to the kitchen. The wrapped watch sat on the counter, waiting to be given. Ethan placed his hand on the box, feeling the weight of it. He knew Lila would love it, but the gift felt like more than just a token. It was a promise, a way to remind her that no matter what the world threw at her, she was capable of weathering it. Ethan poured himself a cup of coffee and settled into his armchair, the house quiet around him. He opened his journal and began to write. We live in a world that judges too quickly, that values the surface over the substance. But the ones who stand tall in the face of it, the ones who refuse to let the world define them, they're the ones who change it. Over the next week, Sophia began to notice small changes at Whitman's. Abigail seemed quieter, less quick with her sharp comments. The other associates started engaging more thoughtfully with customers, their tones softer and more welcoming. Sophia wasn't sure what had sparked the shift, but she felt a growing sense of hope. Perhaps Ethan Gray's visit had been the catalyst. They needed a reminder that every customer deserved respect, regardless of how they looked. One afternoon, as Sophia reorganized the watch display, Abigail approached her. "Do you think I was too hard on that man?" Abigail asked hesitantly. Sophia looked up, surprised by the question. "I think we can all be more mindful," she said carefully. Abigail nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, maybe." Lila's graduation day arrived in a flurry of excitement. Ethan stood in the audience, his heart swelling with pride as she crossed the stage, her cap and gown a symbol of all she had accomplished. After the ceremony, the family gathered at a nearby restaurant to celebrate. Lila was glowing, her smile lighting up the room as she recounted stories from her college years. When the time came for gifts, Ethan handed her the neatly wrapped box. Lila opened it slowly, her eyes widening as she saw the watch inside. "Grandpa, it's beautiful," she whispered, slipping it onto her wrist. "I love it." Ethan smiled, his voice warm. I knew it was meant for you the moment I saw it. Lila leaned over to hug him, her gratitude shining in her eyes. Thank you. I'll treasure it forever. As they continued the celebration, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. Despite the challenges, this moment made everything worthwhile. Ethan woke early the morning after Lila's graduation, his mind still replaying the joy on her face as she opened the watch. Sitting at his kitchen table, he poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and opened his journal. He wrote, "There's a special kind of pride in watching the next generation take flight. Lila has the strength to face whatever comes her way. Still, the world can be unkind, and I hope she carries the lessons I've shared with her as a shield against it." Ethan closed the journal with a sigh, his thoughts drifting to his visit to Whitman's Jewelers. The judgment he had felt there lingered like a shadow. He had faced many such moments in his life, but this one felt different. "I wonder if they've learned anything," he murmured, his gaze fixed on the morning light streaming through the window. Back at Whitman's Jewelers, the atmosphere had subtly shifted. Abigail was quieter during her interactions with customers, her sharp edges softening into something closer to introspection. Sophia noticed the change and hoped it would last. The diversity training that had been implemented after Ethan's visit was now in full swing. Posters encouraging empathy and respect adorned the breakroom walls, and management stressed the importance of treating every customer with dignity. Sophia, however, couldn't help but wonder if the changes would stick. She had seen policies come and go, their impact fading once the novelty wore off. Still, she held on to a cautious optimism. One afternoon, as Sophia worked the counter, a woman in a casual sundress entered the store. She hesitated near the entrance, her eyes scanning the displays as if unsure where to begin. "Good afternoon," Sophia called, her voice warm. "How can I help you today?" The woman's face lit up with relief. "Oh, thank you. I'm looking for a gift for my daughter's birthday." Sophia guided her to the jewelry section, taking the time to explain the various pieces. She noticed Abigail watching from across the store, her expression thoughtful. That evening, as Ethan prepared for bed, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Lila. "Hi, Grandpa," she said, her voice soft but tinged with excitement. Ethan settled into his armchair, his curiosity piqued. "Hello, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "I had my first big interview today," she said, "and I think it went well." Ethan smiled. "That's wonderful news. I'm sure you impressed them." "I hope so," Lila replied. "But something happened that reminded me of what you told me." One of the interviewers seemed dismissive at first, like they didn't take me seriously. But instead of letting it throw me off, I stayed confident. By the end of the meeting, they were listening. Ethan felt a swell of pride. "That's how you do it, Lila. Never let anyone define your worth but you." Her voice brightened. "I learned that from you, Grandpa." "Thank you." As they said their goodbyes, Ethan set the phone down with a sense of peace. He was proud of Lila, not just for her accomplishments, but for her strength. At Whitman's, James Whitman sat in his office, his brow furrowed as he reviewed the latest customer feedback reports. The changes implemented after Ethan Gray's visit had been well received by some, but others resisted the shift in culture. A few negative comments from longtime customers had reached corporate, prompting a tense email from his regional director. "We need to see results," the email read. "Ensure your staff is aligned with company values, but don't alienate our core clientele." James rubbed his temples, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Balancing corporate expectations with meaningful change felt like walking a tightrope. He glanced at a framed photo on his desk, a snapshot of the store's grand opening years ago. Back then, Whitman's Jewelers had been a symbol of elegance and exclusivity. Now, James wondered if those qualities had come at the expense of something far more important. The next day, Abigail lingered near the watch display, her thoughts clouded with self-reflection. She replayed her interactions with Ethan Gray, the subtle condescension in her tone, the assumption she had made without a second thought. It wasn't just him, she realized. There had been others customers whose appearances didn't match her expectations of wealthy clientele. She had judged them, often dismissing their worth before they even spoke. Abigail's discomfort grew as she sorted through these memories. She wasn't proud of how she had behaved, but acknowledging it was harder than she expected. During her lunch break, she approached Sophia. "Can I ask you something?" Abigail began, her voice hesitant. Sophia looked up from her sandwich, curious. "Of course. Do you think I've been unfair to people?" Abigail asked, her gaze fixed on the table. Sophia considered her response carefully. "I think we've all made mistakes," she said gently. "But the important thing is what we do next." Abigail nodded, her expression distant. "I want to do better. I just don't know where to start." That evening, as Ethan sat on his porch, sipping a cup of tea, he noticed a familiar figure approaching. Marcus, a young entrepreneur he had mentored years ago, waved as he climbed the steps to the porch. "Evening, Mr. Gray," Marcus said, settling into the chair beside him. Ethan smiled. "Good to see you, Marcus. What brings you by?" Marcus hesitated, his hands clasped tightly. "I've been following what happened at Whitman's," he said. "I just wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "For standing up for yourself," Marcus explained. "It's not easy to do that, especially in a place like that store. But you did it with grace, and it's made me think about how I approach my own business." Ethan nodded thoughtfully. "Standing up for what's right isn't always comfortable," he said. "But it's necessary." The two men talked long into the evening, their conversation a reminder of the ripple effect one act of courage could have. Lila called Ethan the next morning, her voice bursting with excitement. "Grandpa, I got the job," she exclaimed. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a wide smile spreading across his face. "I knew you would. They must have seen what I've always known, that you're extraordinary." "They said I was confident and prepared," Lila continued. "I think they were impressed by how I handled their questions." Ethan chuckled. "You've got that spark, Lila. It's something they can't ignore." As they ended the call, Ethan felt a renewed sense of pride. Lila's success wasn't just a personal victory, it was proof that the lessons he had passed down were taking root. Sophia arrived early at Whitman's the following week, determined to set a positive tone for the day. She greeted each of her co-workers warmly, her energy infectious. Even Abigail, who usually kept to herself, offered a small smile. As the morning wore on, Sophia noticed something remarkable. The staff seemed more engaged, their interactions with customers marked by genuine attentiveness. When an older woman entered the store, her modest attire contrasting with the opulence around her, Abigail stepped forward without hesitation. "Welcome to Whitman's," Abigail said, her tone kind. "How can I assist you today?" Sophia watched the exchange with quiet satisfaction. Change was slow, but it was happening. The next week, Ethan received a call from a longtime friend, Marlene, who worked at the local community center. "Ethan, we're hosting a panel discussion about resilience and dignity in the face of adversity," she explained. "We'd love for you to speak." Ethan hesitated. Public speaking wasn't something he often sought out. "I don't know, Marlene. I'm not sure I have anything new to say." "Ethan Gray, don't sell yourself short," Marlene chided gently. "You have a lifetime of wisdom, and people want to hear it." After a moment's thought, Ethan agreed. "All right, Marlene. I'll be there." The event was held in a modest but welcoming auditorium. Ethan arrived early, taking in a crowd of attendees who ranged from teenagers to retirees. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan stepped up to the podium, his hat tucked under one arm. "I've lived long enough to see the world change in incredible ways," he began, his voice steady. "But some things haven't changed enough. Too often, we judge each other by what's on the surface, forgetting the substance beneath." He shared the story of his visit to Whitman's Jewelers, not out of bitterness, but as an example of the assumptions people make. "What matters," he said, "is how we respond, not with anger, but with dignity. Because when we hold on to our dignity, we remind others of their own." The audience erupted in applause as Ethan stepped down. Marlene met him backstage, her smile wide. "I told you people needed to hear this," she said. Ethan chuckled. "I suppose you were right." Abigail sat in the break room at Whitman's, flipping through the training materials from the recent diversity session. At first, she had dismissed them as corporate jargon, but now, the words seemed to carry weight. The phrase, "assumptions undermine relationships," stood out to her. She thought of Ethan Gray, his calm demeanor, and the quiet strength he had shown despite her dismissiveness. That night, she couldn't shake the memory of his steady gaze. It wasn't accusatory or angry, just filled with the kind of dignity that made her reflect on her own actions. The next day, Abigail approached Sophia as they organized a new display of necklaces. "Can I ask you something?" Abigail began, her voice hesitant. Sophia nodded. "Of course. How do you always stay so open with people? I mean," Abigail asked, her brow furrowed. Sophia smiled. "I remind myself that everyone who walks through those doors has a story. We don't always know what it is, but they deserve respect all the same." Abigail nodded, the words sinking in. James Whitman sat in a high-back chair at the head of the conference table. The quarterly meeting with Whitman's executives had begun, and the tension in the room was palpable. "Customer satisfaction scores have improved," James said, presenting the latest data. "And our staff's engagement levels are higher than they've been in years." One of the executives, a man with a no-nonsense demeanor, tapped his pen against the table. "That's all well and good, James. But we've had complaints from some long-time customers who feel the store is becoming too casual. They miss the exclusivity." James frowned. "Exclusivity doesn't mean excluding people," he said firmly. "Our goal should be to make every customer feel valued, not just the ones who fit a certain image." The executive leaned back, his expression skeptical. "We'll see if these changes pay off in the long run." James left the meeting feeling a mix of frustration and determination. He knew he was on the right path, but convincing others was proving to be an uphill battle. Lila's first day at her new job was filled with nervous excitement. She arrived early, her portfolio neatly tucked under her arm, and introduced herself to her team with a warm smile. Throughout the day, she noticed small moments where she had to assert herself, explaining her ideas confidently, asking questions without hesitation. During lunch, one of her colleagues, a woman named Carla, approached her. "You seem so self-assured," Carla said. "How do you do it?" Lila thought of her grandfather and smiled. "I've had some good advice," she said. When she got home that evening, she called Ethan to share her experiences. "I kept thinking about what you told me, Grandpa," she said. "It made all the difference." Ethan's chest swelled with pride. "You're doing exactly what you're meant to, Lila. Keep it up." Sophia's growing confidence at Whitman's didn't go unnoticed. James Whitman called her into his office one afternoon to discuss her performance. "Sophia, I've been impressed with how you've handled yourself lately," James said. "You've been a steadying force for the team." Sophia blushed. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman. I've just been trying to lead by example." James nodded. "And it shows. I'd like you to consider taking on more responsibility, mentoring newer employees, helping shape the culture here." Sophia's eyes widened. "It'd be honored." As she left the office, Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wanted to make Whitman's a place where every customer felt welcome, just as Ethan Gray had inspired her to do. One afternoon, Ethan decided to revisit Whitman's Jewelers. He wasn't sure what he hoped to find, but something in him wanted to see if the changes he had glimpsed during his first visit were genuine. The chime of the glass doors announced his arrival, and Ethan immediately noticed a difference. The staff greeted him warmly, their smiles sincere. Sophia was the first to approach him. "Mr. Gray, it's so good to see you again," she said. Ethan nodded. "Good to see you too, Sophia." Abigail emerged from the back of the store, her expression a mix of nervousness and determination. She approached Ethan, her hands clasped tightly. "Mr. Gray," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I owe you an apology for how I treated you last time. I've been working on being better, and I want to thank you for helping me see what I needed to change." Ethan studied her for a moment before nodding. "It takes courage to own up to our mistakes, Abigail. I appreciate that." As he left the store, Ethan felt a sense of satisfaction. The seeds of change he had planted were beginning to grow. Ethan's return to Whitman's Jewelers left a lasting impression, not just on the store's staff but also on the community. Word of his quiet resilience and the changes sparked by his actions had started to spread. Stories of similar moments where people challenged prejudice with dignity surfaced in local conversations. At the community center, Marlene hosted a follow-up panel, this time focused on actionable steps to create more inclusive spaces. Ethan was invited back, and this time he was joined by Lila, who shared her perspective as a young professional navigating the workplace. "Dignity isn't just about how others treat you," Lila said, her voice clear and confident. It's about how you carry yourself in every room you enter. My grandfather taught me that. Ethan beamed with pride as the audience erupted into applause. Meanwhile, at Whitman's corporate headquarters, the leadership team took notice of the positive feedback coming from James Whitman's store. The changes implemented there had led to a marked increase in customer satisfaction scores and even a modest boost in sales. An internal memo circulated among regional managers. The initiative at the downtown location has proven effective. Consider adapting similar practices to improve inclusivity and employee engagement across all stores. For James, it was a moment of vindication. He had faced resistance from both corporate and his own staff, but seeing the results gave him renewed confidence. I think we're onto something, James told Sophia during a staff meeting. And it started with Mr. Gray. Sophia nodded. He reminded us of what really matters: treating people with respect. Abigail's journey of self-reflection led her to take tangible steps toward redemption. She began volunteering at the community center, helping with career workshops for individuals re-entering the workforce. During one session, she spoke candidly about her experiences at Whitman's. I used to think I could tell a lot about people just by looking at them, she admitted. But I was wrong. I've learned that everyone has a story, and it's our job to treat them with kindness, not judgment. Her honesty resonated with the attendees, many of whom had faced similar judgments. Marlene approached her after the session, offering a warm smile. You're doing good work here, Abigail, Marlene said. Abigail nodded, a sense of purpose settling over her. For the first time, she felt like she was contributing to something meaningful. Marcus, inspired by Ethan's example, decided to expand his small business. He opened a second location in a different part of the city, hiring a diverse team of employees and fostering an atmosphere of inclusivity. During the grand opening, Marcus invited Ethan to cut the ribbon. This business wouldn't exist without your guidance, Mr. Gray, Marcus said, handing Ethan the oversized scissors. Ethan chuckled. I just gave you a nudge. The rest was all you. As the ribbon fell away and the crowd cheered, Ethan felt a swell of pride. The ripple effect of his actions was spreading in ways he hadn't imagined. At her new job, Lila was thriving, but her confidence was tested during a high-stakes presentation. One of her colleagues, a senior team member, questioned her ideas in front of the group, his tone dripping with condescension. Lila felt her stomach churn, but she remembered her grandfather's advice. Hold your head high and show them who you are. Taking a deep breath, she responded calmly, countering his points with clear evidence and confidence. By the end of the meeting, the room was silent, and her supervisor gave her an approving nod. Later that evening, she called Ethan. I held my ground, Grandpa, she said. And it worked. They listened. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. You're stronger than you know, Lila. Keep proving it to them and to yourself. One crisp autumn morning, Ethan received an unexpected letter in the mail. It was an invitation from Whitman's corporate headquarters to attend a gala celebrating the company's new inclusivity initiatives. The letter read, Your visit to our downtown store inspired meaningful change within our organization. We would be honored to recognize your contribution at our upcoming event. Ethan stared at the letter for a long moment, conflicted. He had never sought recognition for his actions, but the thought of using the platform to further the message of dignity and respect was compelling. After discussing it with Lila, he decided to accept. It's not about me, he told her. It's about showing others what's possible. The night of the gala arrived, and Ethan found himself standing in a grand ballroom, its chandeliers casting a warm glow over the crowd. Lila stood by his side, her silver watch glinting under the lights. James Whitman took the stage to address the audience. Tonight, we celebrate not just a company initiative, but a lesson in humility and growth. That lesson began with one man who reminded us of the power of quiet strength. He gestured for Ethan to join him on stage. As Ethan approached the podium, the room erupted into applause. Ethan adjusted the microphone, his voice steady as he began to speak. I didn't come to Whitman's expecting to teach anyone a lesson, he said. I came as a grandfather looking for the perfect gift. But what I found was a reminder that respect is something we must give freely, not as a privilege, but as a right. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Change doesn't happen overnight. It happens in moments and the choices we make to see each other as equals, to honor each other's dignity. I'm proud to see this company take those steps. The audience rose to their feet, their applause thunderous. Lila watched with tears in her eyes, her heart swelling with pride. As Ethan stepped off the stage, James Whitman shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Gray," he said. "You've made us better." Ethan nodded. "Keep it up. There's still work to be done." In the weeks following the gala, Whitman's inclusivity initiatives drew significant public attention. While many praised the company for its commitment to creating a respectful customer experience, others weren't as receptive. Online forums buzzed with debates. Some longtime customers complained about the store's new direction, claiming it diluted the brand's exclusivity. Others accused Whitman's of pandering to public pressure. "I've been shopping there for years," one commenter wrote. "This new focus on inclusivity is just a distraction. Bring back the elegance and prestige." The backlash wasn't limited to online spaces. Sales dipped slightly as some customers chose to shop elsewhere. Corporate executives, already hesitant about the changes, began questioning whether the effort was worth the cost. James Whitman, feeling the pressure from both sides, called a meeting with his team. "We need to stay the course," James said, though his tone lacked the confidence it once carried. "This is about more than just sales, it's about doing what's right." Abigail, now more vocal in her support of the changes, chimed in. "It's not easy, but meaningful change never is. We're on the right path." The backlash didn't escape Ethan's notice. News articles and online commentary painted a picture of a divided public, with some questioning whether his experience warranted such a dramatic response. One evening, Ethan sat on his porch, a familiar heaviness settling over him. Lila joined him, her presence a welcome comfort. "Grandpa, why do you look so serious?" she asked, sitting beside him. Ethan hesitated. "I've been thinking about all the noise surrounding Whitman's changes. It makes me wonder if I did the right thing." Lila's brow furrowed. "Of course you did. You stood up for yourself and set an example for others." Ethan sighed. "But what if it's caused more harm than good? What if people see this as a reason to resist change, instead of embracing it?" Lila placed a hand on his. "You've taught me that change takes time, and it's never easy. Don't let the doubters make you question your impact." Ethan gave her a small, grateful smile. "You're wise beyond your years, Lila." At Whitman's, Abigail found herself in a difficult position. Her transformation from skeptical associate to advocate for inclusivity had earned her respect among some colleagues, but also resentment from others. One afternoon, as she prepared for a staff meeting, a coworker muttered under their breath, "Abigail's really leaned into this whole change thing. Wonder if it's just for show." The comment stung, but Abigail didn't let it show. Instead, she focused on the progress she had made, reminding herself of the customers she had helped with genuine care. During the meeting, Abigail presented her proposal for a mentorship program aimed at fostering diversity within the company's workforce. "This isn't just about fixing the mistakes of the past," she said. "It's about building a future where everyone feels welcome here." Her colleagues listened in silence, and though some seemed hesitant, Sophia gave her a reassuring nod. "We've got your back, Abigail," Sophia said. Marcus's new store faced its own challenges. While the grand opening had been a success, foot traffic was slower than expected in the following weeks. He began to worry that his vision for a welcoming, inclusive business wasn't resonating with the community. One evening, he called Ethan for advice. "Mr. Gray, I'm starting to doubt myself," Marcus admitted. "What if I'm doing all this wrong?" Ethan listened carefully before replying. "Doubt is natural, Marcus, but you've built something meaningful, and that kind of impact doesn't always show itself right away. Keep going." "Thanks, Mr. Gray," Marcus said, his voice steadier. "I needed to hear that." At Whitman's corporate headquarters, tensions were reaching a boiling point. Executives who had initially supported the inclusivity initiatives began to backpedal, citing declining sales and customer complaints. "We need to rethink this," one executive said during a meeting. "We can't afford to alienate our core customers." James Whitman, feeling the pressure, pushed back. If we abandon these changes now, we send the message that respect is negotiable. I won't do that. The room fell silent, but James knew the fight was far from over. As the backlash continued, Ethan found himself questioning whether his actions had made a difference. He spent more time alone, reflecting on the years he had spent teaching Lila to stand tall in the face of adversity. One evening, as he flipped through his journal, a particular entry caught his eye. The world doesn't change in a single moment. It changes in the quiet persistence of those who refuse to give up. The words resonated with him, a reminder of the principles that had guided him through his life. Ethan closed the journal and took a deep breath. Maybe this isn't the end of the story, he murmured to himself. Ethan decided to visit Marlene at the community center. As they sat in her office, he shared his doubts about the impact of his actions. Ethan, do you remember the first time you helped out here? Marlene asked, leaning forward. Ethan nodded. I remember. It was a career workshop for young people just starting out. And do you remember how many of those young people came back to thank you later? Marlene pressed. Ethan smiled faintly. A few. Marlene leaned back, her expression warm. You've always made a difference, Ethan. Even when it's hard to see, the ripples are there. Her words stayed with him as he left the center, a spark of hope rekindling in his heart. That evening, Lila stopped by Ethan's house for dinner. As they sat at the table, she noticed the thoughtful look on his face. What's on your mind, Grandpa? She asked. Ethan hesitated before speaking. Do you ever wonder if you're fighting a losing battle, Lila? Like no matter how hard you try, the world doesn't seem to change? Lila considered his question carefully. I think the world does change, but not all at once. It's like planting a tree. You might not see it grow right away, but one day it's there, giving shade to people who didn't even plant it. Ethan smiled, her words resonating deeply. You've got a way with wisdom, Lila. You've always been my greatest teacher, she said with a grin. At Whitman's, the staff began to see the results of their efforts in unexpected ways. A customer who had been hesitant about the changes wrote a glowing review, praising the welcoming atmosphere and attentive service. Sophia shared the review during a staff meeting, her voice brimming with pride. This is why we're doing what we're doing, she said. Even James Whitman, worn from the battles with corporate, felt a renewed sense of purpose. Let's keep pushing forward, he said. We're starting to see the difference. The first signs of a shift were subtle but unmistakable. At Whitman's, customers who had initially resisted the changes began returning, drawn by the word-of-mouth buzz about the improved atmosphere. Sophia noticed it in the smiles of the regulars and the longer conversations they had with the staff. Even Abigail, once hesitant to fully embrace her transformation, was growing more confident in her new role. One afternoon, as Abigail helped an elderly customer choose a bracelet, the woman paused to say, "You've made this such a pleasant experience. I'll definitely be back." Abigail felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time, she truly believed she was making a difference. Ethan received another invitation to speak, this time at a regional leadership conference attended by business leaders, community organizers, and students. When the day arrived, Lila accompanied him, sitting proudly in the front row. Ethan stepped onto the stage, the hum of the audience quieting as he approached the microphone. Change is a slow and stubborn thing, Ethan began, his voice steady. It doesn't come from grand gestures or flashy headlines. It comes from the everyday choices we make to treat each other with respect. He paused, scanning the room. When I walked into Whitman's Jewelers, I didn't expect to start a conversation. I just wanted to buy a gift for my granddaughter. But what happened that day reminded me, and I hope, reminded all of us that dignity is not something to be earned. It's a birthright. The applause that followed was thunderous. As Ethan stepped off the stage, Lila threw her arms around him. "You were amazing, Grandpa," she said, her eyes shining. Ethan chuckled. "I just spoke from the heart, sweetheart." Back at Whitman's, Abigail was preparing for a meeting with James Whitman. She had spent weeks developing a proposal for a mentorship program aimed at underrepresented youth, drawing on her experiences volunteering at the community center. When the meeting began, Abigail felt a knot of nerves in her stomach, but she pushed through. "This program would help us connect with the community in a meaningful way," she explained. It's not just about building careers. It's about creating opportunities for people who might not otherwise have them. James leaned back in his chair, considering her words. You put a lot of thought into this, Abigail, he said. Let's make it happen. Abigail left the meeting feeling lighter than she had in months. She was finally contributing to something that mattered. After weeks of uncertainty, Marcus's business finally began to thrive. His decision to focus on creating an inclusive and welcoming environment paid off as word spread about his store. During a community event, Marcus approached Ethan with a wide grin. Mr. Gray, I got some good news, Marcus said. We're not just surviving, we're thriving. And it's all because of what you taught me. Ethan patted his shoulder. You did the work, Marcus. I just gave you a little nudge. You gave me more than that, Marcus replied. You gave me an example to follow. At Whitman's corporate headquarters, the tide was turning. Reports from stores that had adopted the inclusivity initiative showed consistent improvements in customer satisfaction and employee engagement. During a quarterly review, James Whitman presented the data with quiet pride. These changes aren't just good for our customers, they're good for our business, James said. The executives, once skeptical, nodded in agreement. Keep it going, one of them said. This might just be the future of Whitman's. At her job, Lila had quickly become a respected member of her team. Her ideas were bold yet thoughtful, and her ability to remain composed under pressure earned her the admiration of her colleagues. One day, her supervisor called her into his office. Lila, we've been impressed with your work, he said. We'd like to offer you a leadership position on our next project. Lila's heart soared. Thank you. I won't let you down. That evening, she called Ethan to share the news. Grandpa, they want me to lead a project, she said, her excitement bubbling over. Ethan smiled, pride filling his chest. I knew you had it in you, Lila. Keep shining. Ethan's impact culminated in a formal acknowledgement by Whitman's. The mentorship program Abigail had proposed was named in Ethan's honor, the Gray Fellowship. The announcement was made during a community event held at the store. Ethan stood at the center of the gathering, surrounded by friends, family, and colleagues who had been touched by his quiet strength. When it was his turn to speak, Ethan adjusted his hat and stepped forward. This isn't about me, he began. It's about what we can accomplish when we choose respect over judgment, empathy over assumptions. It's about planting seeds for a better future. As he spoke, Lila stood nearby, the silver watch on her wrist glinting in the sunlight. She felt a surge of pride, knowing her grandfather's legacy was one of resilience, humility, and unwavering dignity. When the event concluded, Ethan lingered, taking in the moment. Abigail approached him, her expression earnest. Mr. Gray, thank you for everything, she said. You've changed my life and so many others. Ethan smiled. We've all got work to do, Abigail. Keep at it. Weeks after the announcement of the Gray Fellowship, Ethan sat on his porch, the evening air filled with the sound of cicadas. A breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of calm. On the small table beside him lay a stack of letters, thank you notes from students, community members, and even employees at Whitman's Jewelers. He picked up one of the letters, his eyes scanning the neat handwriting. Mr. Gray, because of the fellowship, I'll be the first in my family to go to college. Thank you for showing us that every person has value, no matter where they come from. Ethan folded the letter carefully, a quiet smile spreading across his face. He had never sought recognition for his actions, but knowing they had sparked change gave him a deep sense of fulfillment. Lila arrived later that evening, a folder tucked under her arm. She joined Ethan on the porch, her excitement bubbling over. Grandpa, I've been working on something, she said, handing him the folder. Ethan opened it to find sketches and notes detailing her vision for a new business. I want to start a company that focuses on sustainable fashion, Lila explained. Something that not only looks good, but makes people feel good about what they're wearing. Ethan nodded, pride swelling in his chest. This is incredible, Lila. I can see you put a lot of thought into this. I've learned from the best, Lila said with a grin. You've shown me what it means to build something meaningful. Ethan reached over and patted her hand. And I know you'll do just that. The mentorship program at Whitman's Jewelers quickly became a model for other businesses. Abigail led the first group of fellows, guiding them through workshops on customer service, leadership, and career development. During one of the sessions, a young man approached her with a question. "Why are you so passionate about this?" he asked. Abigail paused, her expression thoughtful. "Because I made mistakes," she admitted, "and someone gave me the chance to do better. I want to give that chance to others." Her honesty resonated with the group, and the program flourished under her leadership. Marcus's business continued to grow, and he soon opened a third location. This time, he partnered with a local nonprofit to offer job training for young adults. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Marcus spoke to the crowd, his voice filled with gratitude. "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for Mr. Gray," he said. "He taught me that success isn't just about what you achieve, it's about how you bring others along with you." Ethan, standing in the crowd, felt the wave of pride. James Whitman received a call from the CEO of Whitman's Jewelers, requesting a meeting at corporate headquarters. When he arrived, he was greeted with a handshake and a warm smile. "We've been following the impact of your initiatives," the CEO said, "and we believe this is the direction our company should take moving forward." James felt a mix of relief and pride. The journey had been challenging, but seeing the corporate leadership embrace the changes made it all worthwhile. Ethan decided to visit Whitman's one last time. When he entered the store, the familiar chime of the glass doors greeted him, but the atmosphere felt completely different. Sophia approached him with a smile. "Mr. Gray, welcome back. It's always a pleasure to see you." Abigail joined her, carrying a small box. "We have something for you," she said, her voice warm. Ethan opened the box to find a custom-made pocket watch. Its face was engraved with the words, "In gratitude for your dignity and strength." He looked up, his eyes glistening. "Thank you," he said softly. That evening, Ethan sat on his porch, the pocket watch resting in his hands. He thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment, the judgments he had faced, the quiet strength he had drawn upon, and the ripple effects of his actions. He opened his journal and wrote, "True change doesn't come quickly, but it comes. It grows in the hearts of those who choose empathy over assumptions, dignity over dismissal. I've seen it in my family, my community, and even in a small store that decided to look inward." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan closed the journal and leaned back in his chair. The world wasn't perfect, but it was better than it had been. And for him, that was enough. Years later, Lila stood on a stage at a community event, speaking to an audience of young entrepreneurs. The silver watches her grandfather had given her still rested on her wrist, a symbol of everything he had taught her. "My grandfather showed me that dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you carry within yourself," she said. "And when you stand tall, you inspire others to do the same." In the audience, Marcus, Abigail, and Sophia listened intently, their own journeys intertwined with Ethan's legacy. The mentorship program, now expanded nationwide, had helped countless individuals find their footing. As the event concluded, Lila glanced at the watch, her heart filled with gratitude. Her grandfather's lessons lived on not just in her, but in everyone whose lives he had touched. And somewhere, Ethan Gray was surely smiling. Ethan's story reminds us all that it's the small acts of courage, the quiet moments of resilience, and the unwavering choice to treat others with dignity that create the biggest ripples of change. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life stories like this one. Together, let's spread messages of hope, strength, and empathy. What would you have done in Ethan's shoes? Have you ever faced a moment where standing up with quiet strength made a difference? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your story.